interactive systems talk series. Today we have two talks. First, MacLeod will tell us about an interesting context in society where she's put image captioning technology. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm a PhD candidate in the health informatics program here. But today I'm actually talking about work I did at Microsoft Research in my internship this summer. This was accepted as a paper for CHI this coming year, so this is sort of a practice conference talk. So if you have feedback at the end of it, that's completely welcome. So at Microsoft Research, they have this tool called CaptionBot. The idea here is you give it an image, it generates or determines what the objects are in the image and gives you back a full sentence natural language description of the image itself. So you give it something like this picture of a man on a skateboard kind of doing a trick or jumping, and it will tell you, I think it's a young man jumping in the air on a skateboard, which is pretty cool. In slightly more nuanced contexts, things get a bit trickier. So if you give it this image here, it will tell you, I think it's a man in a suit and tie, and he seems angry, which is understandable. It looks like a man in a suit and tie, and he certainly seems angry. What that doesn't tell you is that that is Melissa McCarthy pretending to be a man from a recent SNL skit. Similarly, Barack Obama, enjoying his new retirement, will give you a caption of, I think it's a man holding a snowboard. And it's certainly a man, he's holding something, but not quite a snowboard. And then sometimes it feels much more dramatically and in kind of funny ways. So you give it this picture of Beyonce from the Grammy Awards this week, and you get not really confident, but I think it's a group of men standing next to a vase, and he seems neutral face. So not even really close. And this is kind of some of the objective of what we're studying here is what happens when these systems fail. Now they are becoming kind of prominent and successful enough that we're starting to see them integrated into real-world applications. So Facebook recently introduced this feature into their social media site, where once you upload your image to the social feed, it generates a list of keywords of the objects in that image and provides that as alt text. So that's kind of a real-world application of some of these types of systems. And this can be really valuable for blind and visually impaired people who can now sort of know information about those images without having to rely on human-authored captions, which are often missing, or without having to ask a sighted person to describe an image for them, which can be kind of time-consuming or burdensome, things like that. Now the trick is typically these captioning algorithms and systems are only ever evaluated by sighted people who can use the visual image as a reference point. So sometimes you'll see this done by comparing the machine output, so what the CaptionBot caption is, against what a human might describe the image as. That provides us with some standardized metrics that are great for being able to compare different algorithms across kind of common or standard data sets. You'll also see this done sometimes in user studies, where people ask sighted individuals to either rate the quality of a caption for a given image, how well does this caption describe this image, or choose the best from a series of captions, some of which might be human-authored, some of which might be machine-generated, to kind of determine the quality of those things. And this makes sense, given that most of this work is not focused on generating alt text for BVIPs or blind and visually impaired people, but has generally been done from kind of a metadata perspective for image search or things like that, where this kind of evaluation has made a lot of sense. So the evaluation criteria then for caption quality and the cost-benefit trade-offs for different types of errors are different than they would be if we had designed these with accessibility as the primary scenario. And the fact that such systems are now being repurposed for accessibility purposes requires kind of a re-examination of some of those fundamental assumptions. So in this work, we've been exploring how blind and visually impaired people experience those automatically generated captions in the context of social media. There are two pieces to this work. In the first part, we conducted a contextual inquiry study. This is kind of a small-scale study we did with 6 people. Came in and did some observations and interviews, think aloud exercises with them to understand their experiences with image captions in the Twitter feed, and then a follow-up online experiment with over 100 blind and visually impaired people to understand the impact of how we word those captions on things like trust and skepticism. So I'll start by talking about this contextual inquiry we did. As I mentioned, this was with 6 people. all of whom were blind. They came in and we had them kind of go through their Twitter application on their personal phone like they normally would, walk through that, describing what they're doing, thinking out loud as they go. We asked them questions then about how they navigate that Twitter feed, what are their kind of strategies around consuming content on Twitter, what happens when they run into images in the Twitter feed. We noticed none of these had any sort of alt text, and how do they kind of make sense of that, process that information, decisions about how they decide who to follow and unfollow on Twitter. We then gave them image probes. I'll come back to this in a minute, but basically looking at tweets that we'd prepared for them that have some captioned images in them. And then finally some follow-up questions about their experience with those captions, the importance of different kinds of information in that caption, and trade-offs between, say, having captions all of the time but having some of them be wrong versus having captions only when we were really sure that they were going to be right but having less information. So those tweet and image probes, we took a bunch of tweets and images from popular Twitter accounts as well as from hashtags that were trending around the time we did this study, which is over the summer. These cover a range of different topics, news, politics, memes, cat pictures, selfies, food pictures, kind of a plethora of things you might see on a site like Twitter. All of the images from those tweets we put through CaptionBot and used those computer-generated captions as alt text for those images. So then when a blind or visually impaired person is going through their Twitter feed, they'll hear the tweet author, they hear the text of the tweet, then they hear the caption of the image. And we're interested in what that experience is like. So some examples of the kind of tweets we were using might be something like this one. This is the image in the background. You can kind of see it's like noodles. There's some maybe spinach or basil or some leafy green thing in there. And the tweet is from Whole Foods Market and says, ready for hashtag summer entertaining, planned with special diets in mind, hashtag gluten-free, hashtag paleo, hashtag vegan. And the caption that CaptionBot gives us for this says, I think it's a plate of pasta and broccoli. So not perfect, but it kind of gives you the rough idea of at least the essence of that image and how it goes with the tweet. Another example is this tweet from Hillary Clinton. This was sent out during the election cycle over the summer. It was part of her campaign that says, some on the other side may say our best days are behind us. Let's prove them wrong. We have this image of her sort of walking onto a stage. There's a crowd of people behind her with cameras and cell phones, it looks like, and all kind of black and white. And the caption you get for that is, I'm not really confident, but I think it's a man doing a trick on a skateboard at night. So not even remotely close in this case. And I'm going to come back to this one as an example. There's another example I'll use here of when these things fail. This is a tweet from the New York Times. It says, why isn't Italy kinder to gays? We have kind of two copies of the Statue of David, photoshopped so they've got their arm around each other on this bright pink background. And the caption says, I'm not really confident, but I think it's a person holding a tennis racket, and she seems neutral face. So again, not even remotely close there. So those two examples will come up a lot in the findings. So overall, we saw that when people looked at these tweets, they trusted them completely. So we told people at the beginning of the study, all of these captions come from this computer-generated system. They will not all be correct. Some of them are wrong. So even when we told people they were going to be wrong, people seem to trust them universally. They say things like, I feel pretty confident about them being accurate. One person explained, I have to trust them because I don't have any form of reference or any reference point to know if they were wrong or not. So unless someone cited, we're saying, I don't know why they said that, that's not what it is at all. You know, if someone were sitting beside me and said, that's not a dog, that's something else, then I would have to say, well, gee, somebody wrote that incorrectly. But without that information there, people kind of default to trusting these captions. Even more, they have these claims about, oh, I never do anything unless I know for sure. I always double check. If I'm going to retweet something, I want to know that I'm retweeting what I think it is. Definitely wouldn't retweet something without looking at it first. She asks her daughter for help, but she says her daughter's getting to the point where she's like, Mom! And then she says, oh, just tell me, minimum words. I know you can do it in 145 characters. And I'll go, okay, I'm going to retweet that to people I know. So she's very adamant that I don't retweet a photo unless I truly know. And yet, when you give her something like this, the Hillary Clinton example, she says, I probably would have just retweeted it thinking it was a skateboarder. She talks a lot about the social consequences of this for her, how she's not normally in the habit of retweeting political things, and for her to retweet something that is that directly tied to politics would have been inappropriate in her current social context. And so despite her claims that, you know, I always double check, Here she kind of demonstrates different behavior, so that's a little interesting as well. It's also interesting, I think, how people make sense of things. So we had one participant talk about, when it made sense, when it was obvious, I tended to trust it. When it didn't make sense or I couldn't see how it related, I was like, where did this come from? Maybe I don't trust it. And yet when we went through the tweets, there was no point at which this person actually stopped and said, I don't trust that, or that doesn't make sense. But rather people kind of fill in details and build these narratives to explain the missing connection between the caption they received and the tweet. So again, P3 here with the Hillary Clinton example says, if you said there's an older man on a skateboard at night, that would make more sense. That's the way I take our best days are behind us, because I'm an old lady, which is not true. I've seen people in their 90s do amazing things. So she's filled in this missing detail about the man in the picture must be an older man. This isn't a tweet about politics. It's a tweet about being young forever or doing amazing things at any point in your life, which is not the case once you've seen the image. Same thing here with the tennis player, New York Times tweet. Person says, okay, so it's a tennis player. Maybe if I recognize tennis players, maybe she's gay. And so that's kind of one way of resolving that difference between what the heck is this tennis player doing and this tweet that has to do anything with Italy and being gay. P5 kind of takes this even further and has this theory that the way that sighted people maybe look at a picture that provides additional information about the story, that this could be really useful to them as well. So again, trusting this tennis racket caption says, why is a tennis racket involved in this story? The way pictures are eye-catching to people, it would engage a different side of my perception, saying, oh, tennis racket. I don't play tennis, but maybe that's even more interesting than I thought, because why is there a tennis racket involved in this story? So they go through to read the article and maybe are disappointed to find out later on that their answer isn't there. So this revealed all these kind of themes of people trusting things, filling in details, building these narratives around these tweets. And we wanted to kind of experiment with how the way we phrase captions influences some of that. So you've seen with, say, the Hillary Clinton tweet, for example, it says very specifically, I'm not really confident, but I think, and people still trust that. So we played around with this more in this larger scale experiment. This was done online with 100 blind and visually impaired people. And we drew from research here in psychology on framing effects. So we're looking here at negative and positive framing differences. If I tell you that you have a, say, 10% chance of dying and a 90% chance of surviving, people treat those risk decisions differently based on that framing, even though those essentially mean the same thing. We also looked at semantic and numeric differences in how we're wording these captions. If I tell you you have a 10% chance of dying versus a very small chance of dying, how does that influence your decision about whether or not to undergo the surgery? So people were then randomly assigned into 4 different study conditions. One at the intersection of positive framing and natural language, which might sound something like, I'm really confident that's a cat sitting on a counter next to a window. Negative and natural language that says there's a small chance I could be wrong, but I think that's a cat. Negative and numeric, which says there's a 20% chance I'm wrong, but I think that's a cat. Or positive and numeric, which says there's an 80% chance that's a cat. So all of those confidence values still come from that caption bot output. All we're doing here is changing the way those are represented. So in this experiment, we start with some background information about their visual impairment, their demographic information, technology skills, and information about their Twitter use. We then have them review 10 tweets, each of which has the author, the tweet text, and then that caption, which is phrased differently depending on which group they're in. So they do that 10 times. For each tweet, we have them rate a Likert scale about how much the caption improved their understanding of the image, of the tweet as a whole, and how much they thought someone else would benefit from this caption. We then ask them, overall, how much did you trust those captions? How smart do you think the computer is that came up with those captions? We go back through the tweets, and for each tweet, ask them if they want to know the human author description, and why or why not. And so for the why or why not, we ask them, or we give them options for I was interested in this tweet or not interested, it was sufficiently detailed or not, or I trusted it, didn't trust it. There's also a write-in option there, which gives us a little bit of a filter over which ones people just weren't interested in, versus which one it was an issue of trust. And then at the end, we give them the actual human captions that are accurate, and ask them again, how smart do you think the computer is, now that you know the right answers. So this was kind of interesting in results. We looked at overall trust as well as overall utility. Overall, people rated the trust fairly high. They thought this was a trustworthy system. They stated they had a lot of trust in it, and there were no significant differences between study groups. So it didn't matter what the phrasing was. Overall, people trusted the captions. Caption phrasing did not make a difference to one's assessment of the captioning technology's trustworthiness overall. We also looked at utility. Again, people found the captions to be helpful overall. There were no significant differences, again, between study groups. So phrasing did not make a difference to the assessment of the usefulness of the captions overall. Now, where we do start to see differences is when we look at the captions that are what we call congruent or incongruent. So if I give you something like the Whole Foods Market tweet, which is from a food store, it talks about food specifically in the tweet, and the caption talks about food as well. So that's a fairly easy connection to make between those two things. Incongruent, on the other hand, would be that New York Times example, where you have to work a lot harder to fill in the details between Italy being kinder to gays and what the heck is a tennis racket doing in this tweet. So we found that people thought that the tweets with high congruence were more trustworthy, which makes some sense. If you expect that a tweet is gonna, or if you expect that the caption follows well from the tweet, you might trust it more. But people who received negatively framed captions trusted incongruent captions significantly less than people who received positively framed captions. Now this is important because people faced with negative framing are more distrusting than of incongruent captions. This is a good thing, this is what we want, since most of those incongruent captions are the cases where the captions are wrong. So here people trust them less, they rely more on their intuition, maybe get a second opinion. There was no difference in trust when congruence was high between groups. We also found that people found tweets with high congruence to be more helpful. This parallels well with the trust findings. People who received negatively framed captions found the ones with high congruence to be more helpful, and the ones with low congruence to be less helpful than people who received the positive framing. So again, negatively phrased captions better encourage a lower level of reliance on things that were incongruent, and a higher level of reliance on things that had higher congruence. We're kind of assuming that part of trusting a caption and finding it useful are, I guess, very closely related. We also looked at tweets where, or cases where the caption reports a great deal of confidence or low confidence. So something like there's a 94% chance that's a plate of food with broccoli, there's a 20% chance I'm wrong, but I think that's a cat, or there's no way I'm wrong about this, would all be things where the caption reports having a great deal of confidence. Whether the caption is actually right or not is a different matter, but this is kind of embedded in that caption. And then the low confidence examples suggest that there's a 10% chance, there's a 75% chance I'm wrong, I have absolutely no idea, but my best guess is that it's a person on a surfboard in a skate park. Here, there were not quite as many differences, but we found that people trusted tweets with high confidence significantly more than tweets with low confidence, which makes some intuitive sense. That's kind of the point of those descriptions. But it is important to note that just because it says it's confident does not mean it's right, necessarily. There weren't any real differences in understanding in this case. And so overall, we recommend that automatically generated captions be phrased in a way that reinforces the possibility the caption might be wrong, so using that negative framing. There were no significant differences in the results between the natural language and the numeric groups, so those kind of decisions can be left up to designers and developers depending on the context they're working in. These negatively framed captions help blind and visually impaired people rely more on their intuition about a caption rather than unquestioningly trusting a caption and making decisions based off misinformation. This might help people to seek a second opinion about an image, and while it would certainly be burdensome to be seeking second opinions on every image, this kind of negative phrasing helps, especially in those cases of incongruence where you need that second opinion more. People still tend to trust the ones with high congruence, or maybe that's not as necessary. So, in conclusion, we observed that blind people are very trusting of captions. They create stories to resolve these differences rather than suspect the captions might be wrong. And if we phrase these captions in such a way that reinforces the possibility the caption might be wrong, people rely more on their intuition and expectations of a caption. And on that note, I am happy to take questions or feedback that you might have. Thank you. I'm not sure. So basically, that would be the same thing as saying like here, instead of there's a 10% chance that's a person, but actually putting in the like only as kind of the qualifier or the adjective or things like that. I think probably those kind of details make a little bit of a difference, but we kind of tested this at a lot of different levels of confidence. So things like I have absolutely no idea, I think was for things under 5% accurate or something like that. And so there's a little bit of variation in there of kind of the lengths we go to. And for this part of the analysis, we picked basically 4 tweets on the extremes to kind of do that, and left out things in the middle that might be a little bit more borderline. Same thing with the congruence, actually. There's a couple tweets where you could argue that the congruence is high or low or kind of vague, and so those were just excluded, and we picked basically the extreme cases to try to understand those differences. Sure.
So at the beginning of when you're talking about the results from the second study, you were saying that the way that excuse me, the confidence the presentation did not affect how much people trusted the results, or the, what's the other one? Find them useful.
Right, overall, yes.
Overall, but then you moved on to distinguish between high congruence and low congruence cases, or congruous and incongruous cases. And, so I guess 2 questions about that. First, did you have a statistical interaction? Did you find that between I mean, it seems that you're saying overall there's no difference, but once you divide the captions into 2 groups, it starts to be a difference.
Right.
But only for certain presentations and certain. So there seems to be the interaction between presentation and congruence.
Yes.
Is that
Yes. So we did a few things. We looked basically overall at the differences between groups for trust and for understanding, and found no significant differences there. But there are then effects between groups for specific subsets of the tweets, basically. So we took only the tweets that were high congruence, and then only the tweets that were low congruence, and redid all of that analysis, and that's where we start to see differences. And I guess all of the statistics and details on results and stuff are in the paper for this if people are interested in diving into that a little more.
And was it manually that you annotated the captions for congruence?
Yes, so we, some of the tweets overlap between the first study and the second study. So when we kind of observed people going through this in the smaller case, that gave us some pretty good clues about how people perceive these and where the congruence differences are. And then the research team basically just manually separated those for the second study. So it's informed by the observations, but mostly done by the research team.
Other questions? Either conferences, like kind of questions you ask at a conference, or feedback about the talk?
Very good talk. I like the slides. So in general, do people trust computers? I mean, you have a very specific case where you're looking at visually impaired, but it seems to me that we've become accustomed to computers being right, so there's a social bias or a bias in general. Is the bias you're seeing here similar to what we see in the general population, or is it more pronounced? Or
that I'm not sure. So I've only really studied trust in this context, and I'm not sure exactly how that would work in the broader context. I do know, it seems like in the literature, at least in the communities I work with, there's trends towards how to encourage people to trust things more. And so especially you see this in like self-driving car kind of research of how do we get people to trust these systems. And I think a lot of the argument I'm trying to make here is that actually like even the best of these systems still fail, and communicating that uncertainty to people in a way that helps them identify when to trust and when not to trust, and when to seek a second opinion or things like that, I think is a valuable area of research. But this is really the only context